Hello beautiful people of the world and welcome to a new PD tutorial. In this video we're going to start to build a MIDI step sequencer. So in the next tutorial we left the situation somewhat like this. So we basically have all the controls that we need to create MIDI notes and a bank generator to trigger the MIDI notes. Now to make a step sequencer, the first thing that we need to do is to create basically a clock generator and a counter, because we have to count from 0 to the number of steps that we want for our step sequencer, let's say 8, and then we have to distribute those banks to different 8 or 16 individual steps. So we already have a clock generator, which is our metro object. Now we need a counter because we have to basically skip through the number of steps that we want to have for our step sequencer. So let's say that we want to have 8 steps, we need to count from 0 to 7. So let's create a counter object. And by the way, the counter object is in the Cyclone library, so you can install this library to have the counter object. So as you can see, we used 7 as the creation argument. That's because the counter object starts counting from 0. So to have 8 numbers, we are actually going to count from 0 to 7, which is 8 numbers. So let's try this out. And as you can see, every half a second, the counter object counts from 0 to 7, which are 8 numbers, and then it goes from 0 again. Okay, so now we need another object, which is the cell object. And basically, the cell object sends a bang out of its outlets depending on the number that receives or the values that it receives on its inlet. We have to use creation arguments because the way it works is this. We need to specify creation arguments. So in this case, we're dealing with numbers. So we're going to create 8 creation arguments, and each creation argument is going to be a number from 0 to 7. Now, what it does is that it compares the numbers that it receives on its inlet to the creation arguments. And when they match, the cell object sends a bang out of the corresponding outlet. So let's create the cell object with the creation arguments. So as you can see, it has 1 inlet and in this case 9 outlet. That's because the first 8 outlets are to send out bangs when the values received on its inlet matches to its creation arguments. If a value received in its inlet doesn't match with any of its creation argument, that value is sent out to its rightmost outlet. We're not going to use this, but of course I told you how it works just so you know. Okay, so let's connect the outlet of the counter object to the inlet of the cell object. And to understand how it works, let's create 8 bangs and let's connect them to the first 8 outlets, starting from the leftmost one. So as you can see, every time the metro object, which is our clock, generates a bang, the counter goes on with its count, and the cell object basically generates a bang depending on the value received from the counter. So basically, we are skipping through 8 steps and we are activating the MIDI notes corresponding to each of the steps that we have to create. Okay, I will leave the bangs, but for the final project, for the final sequencer, you can get rid of them. It's just a visual aid to understand what is happening. Okay, now this block of code here, it's one step of the MIDI step sequencer. So basically this is the first step and it generates one single MIDI note, and we can set again the MIDI note value, the velocity value, and the duration of the notes with our 3 parameters that we learned in the last tutorial. So let's tie this up a little bit. Okay, now we can connect the first outlet of the cell object to the trigger object. And here is the first step of our step sequencer. So now to complete the sequencer, we have to basically copy and paste all of this block for the number of steps that we want. So in this case, there are 8 steps, and it's basically done. We will see in the next tutorial how to make graphically clean this patch. So we're going to learn how to use the graph_on_parent function for the pure data patches. Okay, so that's it for this tutorial. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel, like the videos. If you have questions, you can write it down in the comments, and I'll see you in the next one. Ciao!